Great day, everyone. Thank you so much for finding this time to join us today as we prepare for our Read With Me with Sheriff McNeil and with Miss Shonda Knight today. Thank you guys so much for jumping on with us today. I'm accepting the invitation to join our amazing scholars here at the FAMU DRS school. We truly appreciate you for taking out this time today for joining us. Miss Knight, we're going to go ahead and hand it over to you to introduce Sheriff McNeil. And again, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us. We are elated to be with you all today. I know the school year is winding down, so I'm sure the kids are excited about that, but we're going to hold on just for a little bit longer. But we thank you all for inviting us to participate in this today. I just want to take a minute just to introduce Sheriff, because he has lots of information to give to you all today and insight to share. So I don't want to take up too much time, but I have had the pleasure of working with our great sheriff for the last 3 years now, and I've learned so much. He has a wealth of knowledge and experience. And I don't know if you all have done much research, but he is a history maker within himself. So 40 years of law enforcement experience, is a former president of the International Police Chiefs Association. So that's worldwide. He has served on task force with President Obama's administration. He has been very instrumental when it comes to justice reform in our country. And so he's going to talk a little bit about his experience and a movie that some of you all may be familiar with, in the book that coincides with that film. So that is basically all I'm going to give you, because I don't want to steal any of his thunder. So ladies and gentlemen, Sheriff Walt McNeil.
Well, thank you, Ms. Knight. Appreciate that generous introduction. I was told we probably have like 20 minutes to 30 minutes to have this conversation this morning. Let me, first of all, Shonda, can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Just want to make sure, first of all, I am delighted to have the opportunity to join you all and have this conversation. As Ms. Knight indicated to you, I've been doing law enforcement for over 40 years, unfortunately. And during those 40 years of law enforcement, I've seen our criminal justice system at its best and more often than not at its worst, particularly as it relates to African American in our society. And this book that my wife and I have been reading, and we've not, in fact, my wife will not watch the movie because in reading the book, it's horrific in its impact on justice in America, or injustice in America. And for my 40 years in law enforcement, I have tried to devote myself to having impacts on the criminal justice system to where fairness and equality of justice are our primary responsibilities. You will often hear politicians and law enforcement professionals speak of the rule of law. And the rule of law basically says that we are guided by a set of principles, and those principles become law, become codified, and in doing so, justice is blind. You may have seen the Scales of Justice, where Lady Justice has blindfolded, and the scales are there, and they are not to be imbalanced by one's perception. The problem with that perception is that if laws are put in place that are in and of themselves unjust and have no place for, as the book says, mercy, and if it's disproportionately applied to one race or to people who are without means, then justice being blind does not equate to the equality of the process. And so I wanted to share with you what I've learned over my 40 years, and would ask that after my discussion here today with you guys, that you would go back and perhaps take a read of the book, Just Mercy. So let me get going here by reading one of the statements from the book itself made by Todd Conover. And it reads like this: unfairness in the justice system is a major theme of our age. This book brings new life to the story by placing in two affecting contexts Stephen's life's work and the deep strain of racial injustice in American life. You don't have to read too long to start cheering for this man. Against tremendous odds, Stevenson has worked to free scores of people from wrongful or excessive punishment, arguing 5 times before the Supreme Court. The book exalts not his nobility, but that of the cause, and reads like a call to action for all that remains to be done. The message of this book, hammered home by dramatic examples of one man's refusal to sit quietly and countenance horror, is the evil can be overcome. A difference can be made. Just Mercy will make you upset, and it will make you hopeful. Brian Stevenson has been angry about the criminal justice system for years, and we are all the better for it. Again, Todd Conover, New York Times bestseller review. Let me now talk about the book itself. And to do that, I'll have to give you a little bit about my background. I was born in Laurel, Mississippi in 1955. This book and the story in Just Mercy takes place in the state of Alabama. My father was born in the city of Cuba, Alabama. So it has direct connotations for me and my family. In 1987, a man by the name of Walter McMillan was arrested with no evidence whatsoever, other than the fact that a white man who was under great pressure from the established white community, they needed someone to be arrested so that community could feel at ease. And they talked this white person who had been in and out of the criminal justice system into making up a lie about this black man. And with no evidence to say that he committed the crime, but with over 30 witnesses who were black, who testified that Walter was not in the place that the white man indicated he was when the murder took place. The white guy says that he actually saw Mr. Mitchell, Walter Mitchell, at the cleaners where the woman was killed. And I'll not lie, but 30 black people testified in a court hearing, and that he couldn't have been there because they saw him in other places around the community. In fact, he was not even in the town at the time that the murder took place. So, and it goes on to talk about the number of persons who've been placed in prison, African Americans. And in fact, in the book, Just Mercy, there were a number of other persons on death row, African Americans, who had not committed the crime that they were accused of and had not received the appropriate defense by the attorneys and the justice system in the state of Alabama. This young man, Mr. Stevenson, graduating from college, became, I guess, possessed with the fact that there was so much injustice taking place in and across America, and that he made it his life work to go out and figure out how he and others could then challenge those systems where they saw unfairness and injustice taking place across our country. This attorney, Mr. Stevenson, as I read to you, took countless numbers of cases in state courts, took 5 of those cases to the Supreme Court, and in just about every one of those circumstances was able to prevail. He had released from prison. Over 70 people have been released from prison on the work that Brian Stevens did in terms of trying to bring justice to those persons who were locked out of the justice system. Now that was started in 1987. And here we are in the year 2020. And I can tell you, I served and still work with the Innocence Project. The Innocence Project is a national organization that is focused on reviewing death row cases across the country, and then doing the review and investigation, and then trying to figure out whether those persons actually committed the crimes. And in the state of Florida, we have, in the Innocence Project, we meet annually with a gathering of those persons who were wrongfully incarcerated. And we get those persons, after some great work, get those persons released. And every year we bring those persons back, and the numbers keep growing of persons who are wrongly convicted in the state of Florida. Now, I will tell you that the genesis of most of that, and that is why I myself chose to be in law enforcement, the genesis for most of those wrongful convictions start with the arrest. The arrests were made by law enforcement officers, deputies, troopers. And in those circumstances, we found, when I did the research I was doing for wrongful convictions across this nation, what we found was there were processes in place, systemic processes, whereby police officers, for example, would take a photo. Let's say they take a photo of one black male, just one photo, and they would go to a witness and say, is this the person who perpetrated the crime on you?
Wow.
Well, common sense would tell you that if you take one picture and show it to a person, they're more likely to believe that you know what you're doing, since you're the law enforcement. Whether they don't know if that's the picture or not, but they're going to 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, yes, that's him, particularly if it's an African-American. And the fact that some people see all of us as the same. The only difference may be in the complexion that we have, but even that has not seemed to make a difference. And so I and others around the state of Florida and across the nation engaged in trying to change the photo lineup process by way in which the witnesses identify that person they believe committed the crime. So we have several changes that have taken place, not only in the state of Florida, but we have done this across America, where we now make there at least be 7 photos, that there is what we call a double blind, where the person who's involved in the case, him or herself, will not be the person that presents the photos to the persons who say they are the witness. Now, what we also found was, we had the photo array, as we call them. When we do the photo array, even in those circumstances, we had to make sure the person didn't put his or her finger on one picture and hold it there. We had to make sure that the photos actually all looked alike, and that they were wearing the same type of clothing. They had the same color of hair, the same eyes, because it was these slight differences that sort of tipped off the witness in terms of who they believe committed the crime. And since we put the photo arrays in place and with a double-blind test, we've seen fewer mistaken identities. I had the pleasure of going to New York City, and in fact, I went with a female from North Carolina who had wrongfully identified a person who had been in prison for like 5 years based on her identification of the person who raped her. And she and I have had a number of conversations about how it all took place. And it all went back to initial conversation and interactions that she had with local law enforcement. And she recanted her story, obviously, after some time. And when DNA, and that's been perhaps the best thing that's happened in recent years, is DNA was able to indicate to her that that was not the person. And in fact, DNA led us to arrest the correct person in that case. And the persons looked nothing alike. And so she and I have gone on several speaking engagements across the country. And she was here in Tallahassee in, I believe, in 2007 or so. But the point here is, and the point I want to get across to young students, many of our African-American men and women, and in some cases, Caucasian persons, look at law enforcement as not a career that you would like to serve in. I will tell you and give you a little bit of my background. Like Mr. Stevenson, I was born in Laurel, Mississippi, grew up in Chicago, and I saw the horrific wrongs that were done to African Americans through law enforcement interactions. And in fact, my bus that was being driven to the south side, from the south side of Chicago to the north side for integration, my bus was stopped by Chicago police officers. They came on the bus with their billy clubs and mace. And I think I was 12 years old at the time. And they beat the snot out of us and maced us, and kept us from integrating that school. And I had the good fortune of asking one of the black officers who actually worked in the black community. So I went up to him at the age of 12 and I asked, why did the police do that? And his response to me has stayed with me for my entire life. He said to me, little fella, let me just tell you, that's the way it is right now. That is the way they treat us. And perhaps when you grow up, maybe you can try to help do something about that. And at the age of 12, I decided, yeah, I want to be a cop because I want to do something about that. And I have made it my life work to try to change this criminal justice system. And I often talk to African-American men and young ladies, and they often tell me, I don't want to be a cop. You guys are not right. You're corrupt. You don't treat black people correctly. And my response to that is, if you believe that, then perhaps you should engage in trying to change that. As long as we're not at the table. I remember going to a play called Hamilton in Washington, D.C. And I will never forget, in that play, the question was asked. It was a sort of rhetorical question, but it basically said, you need to be in the room. And there's a song they sing during that play about being in the room where it happens, being in the room where decisions are made. And as long as you're not in the room, you can't have the effect. Your story cannot be told. Your perspective cannot be heard unless you have the opportunity to be in the room where it happens. And that's what I ask all of our African-American men and women. If you want to do something, I am so grateful to Brian Stevenson, an attorney who could be on Wall Street, perhaps making millions of dollars, decided to make his life work, transforming the criminal justice system. that his noble cause was more than his getting accolades, but to restore life, bring life to citizens. And if you read this book, my wife was in tears reading it when the families of their loved ones who've been locked away. Can you imagine being locked away for 10, 20, 30 years for a crime you know you did not commit? And your family starts to say to you when they visit, well, you must have done that. They wouldn't put you in here if you didn't do that. And then you start saying to yourself, as Walter did, maybe I did do it. You know, I don't think from my perspective and being a career law enforcement person, I don't think there's a nobler cause that we have in America than trying to do something about this criminal justice system that continues generation after generation to negatively impact the lives of African Americans. And so I'll start closing here and simply say that please read this book, Just Mercy. I think it captures the very essence of what life is about. And I think life's about our giving, being able to help others. And there's a portion of this book that I was going to read that was too long, so I decided to read this. But one of my favorite persons is W.E.B. Du Bois. And Dr. Du Bois started the NAACP. He was one of the founders who met in Niagara, New York. And that gathering of African Americans challenged us all to find ways in which we continue to fight for justice and truth, and fight for equality for all African Americans, and not only African Americans, but all people. And so I thank you guys for the opportunity, and I'll stop there and see if there are any questions.
All right, thank you, Sheriff. Hopefully you all were paying close attention there. There was definitely some real insight as it relates to our system. And I've heard Sheriff tell this story several times now about how he got interested in law enforcement, and to know that the reason why he got interested in law enforcement was because of the injustice and wanting to make a difference. And so that's definitely something to keep in mind for our new generation. I know you see all the things that are happening in the news. You all have probably followed the Ahmaud Arbery story and all of the things that are talked about right now. So there's a lot of this that is relevant to you today, decades later from when Sheriff was having to deal with some of this. So we do want to open it up now to any questions that you all may have. I am interested to know if any of you all have read the book or seen the movie. And then also any questions for Sheriff.
You guys can also put your questions down in the chat box, and Ms. Knight and I will read your question off to Sheriff McNeil. And if you would like to make a statement, also just place it in there for us.
Anybody with questions?
Any questions? Come on, guys. I know you guys have some questions.
Don't be shy.
We have the sheriff here. Come on, guys. Miss Ligon said, thank you so much for coming, and that her and her family saw the movie.
All right.
We saw the movie as well. Me and my family, we saw the movie as well.
Okay.
What do you think of the film?
I really enjoyed the film. I truly enjoyed it, and it was like, wow, just really open up your eyes to see, like, okay, back then it's the same thing as here. It just collided together, our past and our current future. Our current day and time is the same. Just a little bit more. We have more technology to help determine if, instead of having false accusations towards other, the individuals that's being accused. So we do have better technology today.
Right, there's cell phones, there are body cameras,
right.
So there's all kind of technology that can help, prove cases today. So that's definitely beneficial for sure.
Now, you just said body cam. So our officers here in Tallahassee, in Leon County, are they required to wear body cam?
Yes, the Leon County Sheriff's Office, we were late to the table. I came in office 3 years ago, and so went through a process. So the last 2 years, we've been, well, maybe a year and a half, we've been wearing body cameras. Tallahassee Police Department's been wearing body cameras for probably 3 years as well.
Okay. Awesome.
All right, anybody else have any questions or comments?
Corinne. Okay, Corinne, I'm going to unmute you, love. You can go ahead and ask your question. Go ahead, sweetie.
Okay, so because of coronavirus, how does this affect the...
Say it again, Corinne. Your speaker went out, princess.
She's on mute right now. I don't know how she got back on mute.
Okay, go ahead, Corinne.
Okay, how do, because of coronavirus, are prisoners who like committed heavy crimes, or prisoners who are in prison right now, are they being released, or are they being socially distanced? Are any getting coronavirus in Tallahassee? How are they being affected?
Well, Corinne, thank you for that question. That's a great question.
I love it.
I can tell you, first of all, that there are no corona cases in the Leon County detention facility. We have none of our inmates have contracted the virus. We have a process by which we, first of all, keep in mind that there were a number of persons already in our detention facility before the coronavirus occurred. So, in fact, if you want to look at it, they are already quarantined. So the only way that they could get the virus was by people who were out in the community by the time the virus showed up in America. So we went ahead and quarantined those persons in our detention facility. And then all persons coming in to our facility, we have a 14-day step-down process. We do the temperature check when they come in. We ask them a battery of questions. Have you been to New York, Miami? Have you been on an airplane? Have you been around anybody that has any coughing and that sort of thing? Even after we ask those questions, we quarantine those persons in isolation for 14 days before we then place them into one of our, what we call our pods. We've been very successful with that, making sure that we don't get those persons mixed. We also, you talked about major cases of major crimes. What we've done so far, working with the state attorney's office and the public defender, we've not made arrests on minor cases. Any minor arrests, misdemeanors, that sort of thing. Our population in our detention facility has gone down from 1,200 inmates to 800, and I think I looked today, it was 858. So we have a significantly lower population of inmates right now, and we do make sure that that they are every day as much social distances as we can possibly do, and that's why we've kept our population down. So we've got enough space now to move our people out.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Really good question, Corinne. I also saw a question from Brooke here about how can students who are interested in law enforcement begin to prepare themselves?
Great question. I think, first of all, I think having a mindset that that's what you want to do, that you really want to be in law enforcement. And then doing everything that you can, read as much as you can about the criminal justice process. Understand the judicial process. What's a judge's responsibility? What's the state attorney's office responsibility? How does the public defender's office work? Learn about and read about the criminal justice system itself. And if you do that reading, and I'll tell you that one of the major things about law enforcement is that we think that it's all about guns and arresting people. The vast majority of the criminal justice system are judges and lawyers and defense attorneys and all that makes up our system. But the key part of it is those persons that come into law enforcement. And what I don't like about it, I teach and have taught at FSU and FAMU. The majority of the students that take criminal justice courses have no desire to be in criminal justice. Most of them are taking a major that they believe is going to be an easier one than perhaps physics. So they take that route. But I would ask that if you really do some soul searching, and if your desire is to make a good living, and you can as a law enforcement person or in the criminal justice system, but more than that, you have to have a mind towards helping people and love for making sure that injustices aren't taking place. And if that's your mindset, then I would start first by learning more about the criminal justice system itself, and then doing what we call ride-alongs when you become 18. You can join the Explorers even now and get an idea and get around the environment and see exactly what takes place. And I think you'll find there's a rich camaraderie in law enforcement, but you also find there's a lot to be done. Those of you young girls and guys, I would offer that you would take right now, if you're in middle school or something like that, take scouting. It gives you an idea of the same kind of orientation toward groups of people who have to work together, and then keep trying to move on to Explorers, on to being a cadet in some places, but try it out at an early age, and I think you'll come to enjoy it. But the idea being to make up your mind early on, like I did at 12, that this is what I want to do for my life.
And Sheriff mentioned our Explorers program at the Sheriff's Office. Just to elaborate, those are like our junior deputies. They're high school students who they train just like our deputies train. They actually compete with other students across the state. And our program is very, very, very vibrant. They've won lots of competitions. And we've got great leadership as it relates to the Explorers program. So if you're interested in that, you can find more information on our website, which is leoncountyso.com. I'll put the website in the chat here for anybody who wants to go there and find out more information about the Explorers program.
Ms. Knight, also, and Sheriff McNeil, I just heard you say scouting. Is that another program for younger students?
I like scouting, that you can start at Cub Scout, Brownie Scout, and it builds those relationships. And in some cases, as they get older, when I was in Quincy as a police chief there, we had a scouting component as a part of the Quincy Police Department. Now, even our Explorers are an extension of scouting. So it's all related back to scouting.
Got you. Okay.
I see another question here. Let's see. Kay asks, what advice can you give to a mother of 3 young Black men regarding talking to them about conducting themselves if they are ever in a situation involving a law enforcement, for example, a traffic stop?
Well, I'm sure you guys have heard these things I'm about to say 1,000 times. Basically is that there's no argument to be won on the streets when a cop stops you. When a deputy stops you, a police officer stops you. The first thing I tell anybody is just comply. Officer walks up to your car, asks for your driver's license. Don't ask him why'd you stop me. Eventually he or she will tell you that. They ask you for your driver's license. I tell people, my wife and I talk about this all the time. We tell our daughter to keep the visor over the top. Keep all your identification stuff in the visor. Clamp it all down. And when he asks you for it, you're not having to reach into your glove box, reach into your purse. All of it's right there available. You simply say to the officer or deputy as they approach and ask you for it, say, it's in my visor. I'm going to reach and get it from the visor. And they'll say, okay, and you reach up and get it. You hand it to them. They will read it. In the state of Florida, I've seen these videotapes where they say, you have to tell me why you stopped me. In the state of Florida, police officers do not have to tell you why they stopped you. They can tell you once they get ready to give you a citation, but they don't have to tell you exactly why they stopped you. And there's another scenario that people misunderstand, which is you don't have to tell them your name. Well, in the state of Florida, you do have to identify yourself. And so that's the 2 or 3 things that I see most African-American males getting in trouble with. In some states, you don't have to give your information. In the state of Florida, you do. So if you see a video in some place like New York or somewhere, they're showing, I don't have to tell you that. Well, in the state of Florida, you do. You have to tell them and give them some identification if they ask you for it. So again, the most fundamental aspect of that is, particularly on traffic stops, is to just comply. Now, the last thing I'll tell you about that is you will never win a case on the streets. Whether you ran the stop sign or didn't run the stop sign, or if you were speeding, you're not going to win trying to convince that officer or deputy. He or she's already made up their mind. In fact, we teach them, you make up your mind before you get to the car about what you're going to do. Don't let the person who's in the car sway you one way or the other. You make up your mind, if this was such an egregious situation, you can write a ticket, write the ticket. So, and if they follow our guidelines, now we say this because pretty girls shouldn't get away with males, because they're a pretty girl when you get there, she didn't get a ticket. And so we try to make sure that they know. So you're not going to win the argument about, hey man, can I talk you out of this ticket? I didn't really do it. Can you give me a break this time? Just simply comply. And believe it or not, when I made traffic stops myself, I knew that I was not going to give a ticket. But I would, if it was somebody ran a red light, I would, look, you just ran that red light. You could have killed me. You could have killed this. Please slow down. I'm going to give you my speech. And then I'm going to say, okay, go on about your business. So just simply comply.
Okay, we've got another question here. What is being done to educate citizens about what they are required to do during a traffic stop, providing their name, etc.? And that is one of the things, Sheriff, if I may, that we have as an agency taken some initiative to put out to the public, because we know that's a question that we are approached with a lot, and lots of people don't really know. And so we have taken to social media. Sorry about that. We've taken to social media. A lot of the groups, when we're talking to youth groups, that's a topic. Sheriff actually did a talk last year, I believe, or last semester over at FAMU to some FAMU students just on the topic of traffic stops. So we're working hard to get out in the community to inform the public as it relates to what are your rights, what should you do. As Sheriff said, I love, it's so true that you've never won that argument out there at a traffic stop. So to comply and to have your day in court is really the way to go when it relates to those type of incidents.
I have a question. Just piggybacking on what you just said, Ms. Knight. What are some things that's being done for as to going into the schools to provide the information to our young kids, and especially our high schoolers, because they are now driving, right? And just not about traffic, not just about the tips on if you get stopped at a traffic light, but just in general, just being a citizen in the community. Are you guys going into the schools to provide that information?
Yes, we have in every school, we have what we call school resource deputies. And we also have Tallahassee Police Department is now covering some of the schools, the elementary schools in the city of Tallahassee. And part of that, the orientation that we have is, and we're asking that our deputies get an opportunity, a chance to address the various classes about the law enforcement and you might say, the police and you. And there's a whole curriculum that we've tried to build around that. There's also an organization called NOBLE, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, that I'm a member of, and I believe the president, her name jumps out of my head right now, but NOBLE also comes in periodically and goes to schools and puts on programs and talks about the very things I just talked about, the relationship with law enforcement on a regular basis. We can do more of that. There's no question about that. Obviously, for the NOBLE group, they don't do that full time. So it's probably 3 or 4 times a year that they can get those things together and get away from their regular job and go out and do it. But our school resource deputies are in the schools. And that's one of the things I'll talk to Chief Audrey Smith, who is our Chief of School Resource or Youth Services, and ask her to see if we can't enhance our footprint in our schools.
Yeah, and yeah, because I really think like it's during this day and age now, like I really feel like it's imperative that we start teaching our children, because to be real, a lot of what we're seeing, throughout the country of the police brutality, that you're now teaching your kids, okay, to be afraid of the officers,
Right.
So building the relationships that with our young kids, start them now to know, okay, I can trust the officers and not just be afraid of them by what I'm seeing on TV, because
Right.
we are seeing some things that's taking place that is not, no justice, but our officers are not bad, but just really building that relationship with our kids, with officers, as well as our community, especially in the Black community, really just being present in the community, in our Black communities, more.
Right. Well, there's another organization, the 100 Black Men of Tallahassee. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that organization. I'm a member, and we have each Saturday at Griffin Elementary School, we have a session there, and I'll come in and talk about youth issues and perspectives from youth. And usually we're not very crowded, quite honestly. We probably have about, at the most, 10 young men that will come to our programs every Saturday. And of course, we haven't had it since the COVID outbreak, but it's also a tool that we should get out to our community, that the 100 Black Men are trying to fill that gap of educating our youth about our relationship with law enforcement.
Have you considered with the COVID, the case with COVID-19, have you considered how we're doing now with Zoom, doing it virtually, a virtual meeting with the men and our young guys?
Well, I haven't spoken to our president recently, but that's something I'll bring up at our next meeting.
And what's the ages? So I have an 11-year-old. He's turning. I have a 12-year-old. He's turning 13. Will he be allowed to participate?
Oh, absolutely. We put on a camp every year. We put on in fact at FAMU, at the recreation building there, every year we have a sleep in for the weekend, and we teach kids how to play chess, get them out of their normal habitat, you might say. We bring people in to play squash. different types of, to give them a rounder experience of different types of things. And of course, I'm always there talking about law enforcement.
Awesome. I think that sounds amazing. And also allows the children to see the officers in a different light.
Yes.
Let them know, like, okay, you're human just like me. You know,
Right.
You know, you have a greater responsibility as
Right.
an officer.
Yeah. Chief Terrence Calloway is also there from FAMU. So we have it on FAMU's campus. So we have all the chiefs, all the African American chiefs, Glenn Sapp from Quincy, Terrence Calloway from FAMU, myself, and I think that may be it.
Okay, awesome. Is there any other questions? I'm sorry, I know I had so many questions. I apologize. But is there anyone else? Any of our students have any other questions?
Well, before we wrap up, I do want to say to all of our students, I know a lot of you all are on social media. So if you would go to your Instagram and follow us on Leon Sheriff, or Leon CO Sheriff is our handle. Leon CO Sheriff. That is our Instagram page, and we're constantly sharing information there. That is definitely very helpful. For the last several Saturday nights, actually, we've been hosting a virtual party with DJ Lil Boy. And so for 1 hour on Saturday nights, you get to listen to DJ Lil Boy on our Instagram page, spinning some of your favorite tunes. So we're really working hard to engage our youth. And if you follow us on our Instagram page, you'll get to see some of the activities that we are having in the works right now.
I think Corinne had a question. I saw Corinne Hobbs, I believe her name is.
Oh, yes. You have another question, Corinne?
All right, Corinne, you're unmuted.
Okay, so this is another question that involves the Justice Department and coronavirus. I know that since this is a global pandemic and most viruses and pandemics last up to 18 months, and that it won't be very likely that schools and places will reopen in the fall, and even if they do, we will still probably have to follow social distancing laws. What will, Sheriff McNeil, what will happen to the, how do you think the Justice Department will reopen? How do you think it'll affect the prisoners? How do you think any officers who may have contracted the virus in the future? I'm hoping that they don't, but what if that happens? What if the Justice Department has to start laying different jobs off? How do you think that might affect the Justice Department in the future?
Well, Corinne, I tell you, you are one bright young lady.
Yes.
Let me see if I can answer that. The system right now, Corinne, is gearing to open. I just read where the governor has now opened all recreational facilities. I think he's up to about 60% of normal is where we are right now. I think by the end of June, July, we will be close to 100% in the state. The governor has also allowed professional sports to resume in the state of Florida. There's talk of the NFL playing football in some designated sites across the country, and Orlando has been designated as one of those potential sites. I give you that backdrop to say that the criminal justice system is also preparing to have some level of opening. I have a conference call twice a week with our chief judge, our state attorney, and our public defender. And we are gearing up to do stages of reopening in the courthouse. The first part of that will probably be having first appearances at the annex on Thomasville Road. And those will be appointment by appointment only. And there will be a staging area, and only so many people come into the facility at one time. We are gearing up to have temperature checks points at the courthouse. And Corinne, to answer your question, the new normal will be for the foreseeable future. I think you couched it exactly right, that the pandemic will probably last for at least 12 to 14, 18 months. So during that period of time, we will have, where the openings take place, I suspect even some of the private businesses, the Publixes and so on, will be doing temperature checks as people come into the grocery stores and others. I'm sort of predicting that, but I know the governmental buildings will do that exact thing. Now, as relates to how that impacts my staff and the detention facility, I am probably the most conservative politician you want to find as it relates to this coronavirus. I'm liberal as it relates to the criminal justice system and trying to make sure that justice occurs for all. But when it comes to those persons who are incarcerated, I have responsibility for, I'm going to keep that locked down until I get an order from somebody making me do something different. And I'm going to protect, right now, there's only probably 33% of my staff that is actually working in the field. I've been protecting my deputies by putting them on 28-day rotations so that the likelihood of their coming in contact with the virus is reduced. We've asked them not to make as many traffic stops, only make traffic stops when they are absolutely needed. And when they do, they are to put on all the gear to make sure they keep themselves safe and do the social distancing. Very happy to say that we've had no cases of our staff becoming infected on the law enforcement side. We've had one scare with one of our bailiffs who initially they thought it was a false negative, I guess. And so we quarantined him for a period, and he got checked again, and he was then cleared, all clear. So we've not had any significant problems. We're working with our 65 and older employees because they are at higher risk, and people with pre-existing conditions. We have 5 of those, and they're currently, those 5 don't currently have a job they can do from home, but we're paying them anyway. I have said to them, just figure out, give me a call and just tell me you're doing good today. And so we don't plan to lay anybody off. We hope to get through this. And but I'll end it by saying that we will adjust to the periods. Corinne, if you didn't know it, the medical staff said that this virus will peak in our community in Leon County on about the 26th or 27th of this month. And if you've been following it, I think we had 25 occur over the last week or so, which is the most we've ever had in one period. And so that's kind of consistent with what they were talking about with the peak. And once we hit that peak, from the medical perspective, we should then start to see a downward trend in terms of the coronavirus in our community. And when we did start getting the downward trend, at that point, I'll make a decision about how much more I will open the Leon County Sheriff's Office up and how many more staff I'll put out on the roadways or back in investigations. But Corinne, thank you for that question. I know I had a long answer, but you asked a lot.
Thank you indeed. Great question, Corinne. And thank you all for your time. I think we're about ready to wrap up. Yeah, I don't see any other questions over there, but we've appreciated being able to speak with you all today. Invite us back anytime.
I'm sorry, one more question, Ms. Knight, from Ms. Wallace. What is the percentage of female officers in LCSO, and are there any special efforts to recruit females?
It's a good question. When you say LCSO, let me answer the question like this. We have in our detention facility, about 70% of our staff are African American. And of that 70%, I'd say at least probably 50% are female in our detention facility. On the law enforcement side, that has been a challenge for us. Our female population is probably close to about 23%. And our African-American population in total is probably like 28, 29%, less than 30%. We got a lot of work to do.
Well, that is about all for today. And again, I would like to say thank you, Sheriff McNeil, and thank you so much, Ms. Knight, for accepting the invitation and finding out your time today to join DRS. And we truly appreciate it. I thoroughly enjoyed this session. And hopefully when we return back to the brick and mortar, maybe we can get you guys to come out with your program. Noble, or another program that you guys might have that can, start building a relationship with our DRS students. But again, thank you so much, Ms. Knight. Do you have any final words?
No, that's it. We just appreciate you all having us on this afternoon.
Okay, thank you. And again, I truly appreciate it, and thank you for accepting the invitation.
Now, we can't end it without Ms. Knight. You know how we end everything we do.
I know. I should know better.
Now, at Leon County Sheriff's Office, we end all of our meetings with one acclamation or one affirmation, and that is we say we're all in. So to all the folks who are on this Zoom call, thank you guys for joining. And in the tradition of Leon County Sheriff's Office, all in.
Okay.
All in.
So we're doing it together? 2 or 3. We are
All
in. Thank you guys. You guys have an amazing and safe weekend. Again, thank you, Sheriff McNeil, and thank you, Ms. Knight. You guys be safe. And thank you.
Very welcome. Thank you.